They called me the charity bride, the one bought with desperation and sold with shame. I heard the whispers even as I walked down the aisle of St. James Cathedral, my father's trembling hand upon my arm, my mother's sobs echoing behind me like a funeral march. I was 22 years old on the day I became the Duchess of Greystone, and I had never felt more alone. The man waiting for me at the altar stood with his back rigid as iron, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, his jaw set in a line that suggested he would rather be anywhere else in the world. Edward Ashford, the Duke of Greystone, was 38, a widower of 3 years, and according to every drawing room in London, a man whose heart had been buried alongside his first wife. He did not turn to watch me approach. He did not meet my eyes when the vicar asked if he took me as his lawful wedded wife. He simply said yes, in a voice as cold as the January rain pelting the cathedral windows. And I understood in that moment exactly what I had become. A transaction. A solution to my father's gambling debts and his need for a respectable mother figure for the daughter no one knew he had. Nothing more. The wedding breakfast was a silent affair. My family did not attend, too ashamed perhaps, or simply too relieved to have rid themselves of the burden I represented. The Duke's relatives appeared only long enough to assess me with narrowed eyes and pursed lips before departing with promises to call that I knew would never materialize. I sat at one end of the long dining table in Greystone House, the Duke at the other, an expanse of polished mahogany between us that felt wider than the Atlantic. He read correspondence throughout the meal, his knife and fork moving with mechanical precision, never once glancing in my direction. That night, he did not come to my chambers, nor the next night, nor any night after. I learned quickly that ours was to be a marriage of convenience in the truest, coldest sense of the term. We occupied the same house, bore the same name, and existed in completely separate worlds. Greystone Hall, the Duke's primary estate in Yorkshire, became my prison and my sanctuary all at once. It was a magnificent place, all grey stone and towering turrets, surrounded by moorland that stretched endlessly toward a horizon I could never quite reach. The servants were polite, but distant, well trained in the art of seeing without observing, hearing without listening. They moved through the halls like ghosts, and I became one myself, drifting through rooms filled with furniture draped in dust covers, past portraits of Ashfords long dead who seemed to judge me with their painted eyes. The Duke maintained his residence primarily in London, returning to Greystone only when business demanded it. When he was present, he kept to his study or rode out across the moors for hours, returning with mud on his boots and that same expression of profound isolation etched into his features. We took meals separately. We never spoke beyond the barest courtesies required by civility. I was the Duchess of Greystone in name, but in truth I was nothing at all. 3 months into our marriage, I discovered the child. I had been exploring the eastern wing of the house, that portion kept locked and unused, when I heard it. A small voice, singing. A child's voice, clear and sweet, coming from behind a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. My heart seized in my chest. I had been told there were no children at Greystone, that the Duke's first marriage had produced no heirs, that the succession would eventually pass to a distant cousin. Yet here was undeniable proof that someone had lied. I tried the door and found it unlocked. Inside was a nursery, brightly lit and cheerfully furnished, utterly at odds with the rest of the house. And there, sitting on a cushion by the window with a wooden doll in her lap, was a little girl of perhaps 5 years old. She had dark curls and gray eyes exactly like the Duke's, and when she looked up at me, she smiled with such innocent trust that I felt something crack open inside my chest. "Hello," she said. "Are you the new mama?" I could not speak, could not breathe. I knelt down slowly, my skirts pooling around me, and she reached out to touch my face with one small hand. "You are pretty," she said. "The old mama was pretty too, but she went to heaven. Papa said I must stay up here and be very quiet because the house is sad." Are you sad?" "What is your name?" I managed to whisper. "Charlotte," she said. "Charlotte Rose Ashford. But everyone calls me Lottie. Will you call me Lottie?" "Yes," I said, and I took her small hand in mine. "Yes, Lottie, I will call you that." She beamed at me, and in that moment, I made a decision that would alter everything. I would not pretend this child did not exist. I would not leave her alone in this bright prison, forgotten and hidden away like some shameful secret. Whatever the Duke's reasons for concealing her, whatever scandal or sorrow surrounded her existence, I would not abandon her to it. I began visiting the nursery every day. At first, the governess, a stern woman named Mrs. Harlow, watched me with suspicion and disapproval. But Lottie's joy was so genuine, her laughter so rare and precious, that even Mrs. Harlow's rigid demeanor softened eventually. I read to Lottie, played with her, taught her songs my own mother had taught me. I held her when she cried for the mama she barely remembered, and I promised her that she was loved, that she mattered, that she was not alone. I asked no one about her. Not the servants, who surely knew and would not tell me. Not the Duke, who I still barely saw and who certainly would not welcome my questions. I simply loved her, this hidden child, and tried to fill the emptiness in her world with whatever light I could offer. Summer arrived, and with it came the Duke's return to Greystone for an extended stay. I heard him arrive late one evening, heard his heavy footsteps in the corridor outside my rooms, heard him pause as though he might knock, then move on. The next morning, I encountered him in the breakfast room, the first time we had been alone together since our wedding day. He stood by the window, coffee cup in hand, staring out at the gardens. He did not turn when I entered. "Good morning, Your Grace," I said quietly. He acknowledged me with the barest nod. We stood in silence for several long moments, the weight of all that remained unspoken pressing down upon us both. I poured myself tea with hands that trembled slightly, added milk and sugar, stirred carefully. I could feel his gaze on me now, heavy and assessing. "I am told you have been spending time in the East Wing," he said at last, his voice flat and without inflection. My hand stilled on the teaspoon. I met his eyes for the first time in months, and what I saw there made my breath catch. Not anger, as I had expected. Something else, something raw and unguarded, quickly shuddered away. "Yes," I said. "I have been visiting Lottie." His jaw tightened. "That was not part of our arrangement. Our arrangement," I said, and heard the edge in my own voice, did not include mention of a child who exists, who is lonely, who deserves better than to be hidden away like something shameful." "You know nothing about it," he said. And now there was heat in his tone, the first real emotion I had heard from him. "Nothing about what she represents or why she must remain apart from society. You had no right to interfere." "She is a little girl," I said, setting down my teacup with more force than I intended. "A little girl who calls me Mama and asks why her papa will not visit her. What right do you have to keep her locked away? What possible reason could justify such cruelty?" He moved toward me then, crossing the distance between us in 3 long strides, and I saw his hands clench at his sides as though he wished to reach for me, to shake me, or perhaps to plead with me. His eyes were anguished now, all pretense of coldness stripped away. "She is not mine," he said, and the words fell between us like stones into still water. "Charlotte is not my daughter. She is my wife's child, born 8 months after my wife's death, fathered by another man. A man my wife loved while lying in my bed, while bearing my name, while destroying everything I believed about my marriage and my life. I keep her hidden because society would destroy her if they knew the truth. I keep her hidden because I cannot bear to look at her without seeing everything I lost, everything that was a lie. And I keep her hidden because despite all of that, despite the rage and the humiliation and the betrayal, she is an innocent child who deserves protection from a world that would call her bastard and worse." I stared at him, speechless. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of his ragged breathing and the distant call of birds in the garden beyond the window. "So now you know," he said, his voice rough. "Now you understand why I brought you here. Why I needed someone to be the Duchess in name, to provide respectability, to ask no questions, and expect nothing from me. I cannot love again. I will not. But Lottie needs someone, and you needed an escape from your father's debts. That is the bargain we made, whether you understood it fully or not." He turned away from me then, his shoulders rigid, and I saw clearly for the first time the man beneath the title. Not cold, but broken. Not cruel, but drowning in a grief and anger he did not know how to release. And I understood suddenly that this marriage, this strange half-life we had been living, was his attempt to protect himself from ever being hurt again, while simultaneously trying to do right by a child who was both innocent and a living reminder of his deepest wound. I should have been angry. Perhaps I should have demanded he send me away, release me from this loveless arrangement. But instead, I found myself moving closer to him, close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the windowsill as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Then we will protect her together," I said softly. "I will be the mother she needs, and you will be the father she deserves, whether or not you share her blood. And perhaps in time, we will find a way to be more than strangers, bound by a contract and a secret. Not for love, if you cannot bear it, but for her sake. And perhaps a little, for our own." He did not answer me, did not look at me, but after a long moment he nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and I knew that something between us had shifted, not toward warmth, perhaps, not yet toward understanding, but toward something that might, in time, become a partnership built on shared purpose, if not affection. I left him there by the window and returned to my rooms, my heart beating hard against my ribs. I did not know then that this conversation was only the beginning, that the secrets buried in Greystone Hall ran deeper than one hidden child, that the truth about the late Duchess and her supposed betrayal was far more complicated than the Duke believed. I did not know that the ballrooms of London would one day bear witness to revelations that would shake the very foundations of everything we thought we understood about duty and love and the lies we tell ourselves to survive our pain. All I knew was that I had seen the man behind the mask, if only for a moment, and that I had made a promise to a little girl with gray eyes and dark curls, a promise I intended to keep, no matter what it might cost me. The days that followed our confrontation in the breakfast room brought a subtle but undeniable change to the atmosphere at Greystone Hall. The Duke did not suddenly become warm or affectionate, did not seek my company or offer confidences, but he ceased avoiding me quite so deliberately. We began taking dinner together in the evening, sitting at opposite ends of that vast table, speaking little but no longer pretending the other did not exist. Sometimes I would catch him watching me with an expression I could not quite decipher, something between curiosity and wariness, as though I were a puzzle he had not expected to encounter and did not know quite how to solve. More significantly, he began visiting the nursery. I discovered this quite by accident one afternoon, when I arrived for my usual time with Lottie and found the door already open, heard his deep voice reading from a storybook. I paused in the doorway, my hand on the frame, and watched as he sat in the chair by the window with Lottie curled against his side, her small hand resting on his arm, her face rapt with attention. He read well, giving each character a different voice, and when he reached a particularly exciting passage, Lottie squealed with delight, and he smiled. Actually smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire countenance and made him look years younger. He glanced up then and saw me standing there. The smile faded, replaced by something more guarded, but he did not stop reading. He simply nodded toward the empty chair across from him, an invitation of sorts. I sat down quietly and listened as he finished the story, watched as Lottie begged for another, and he pretended to resist before giving in with theatrical reluctance that made her giggle. It was the first time I had seen them together. The first time I understood that despite his words about not being able to look at her without pain, he loved this child. Perhaps not in the way he might have loved a daughter of his own blood, but loved her nonetheless, fiercely and protectively, even as that love wounded him. When Lottie finally fell asleep against his shoulder, he carried her to her bed with such gentleness that I felt something warm unfurl in my chest. We left the nursery together, walking side by side down the long corridor in silence. At the top of the stairs, he paused and turned to me. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for caring for her, for seeing her as more than the symbol of my humiliation." "She is easy to love," I replied. "She has your eyes, you know, and your stubbornness when she wants something." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "My stubbornness. Yes, I suppose she does." We stood there for a moment longer, the evening light slanting through the tall windows and painting everything in shades of gold and amber. I wanted to ask him so many things. About his first wife, about what had truly happened, about whether he believed the story he had told himself about her betrayal. But I sensed that this fragile truce between us could not yet bear the weight of such questions. So I simply inclined my head and moved past him toward my own chambers. That night, for the first time since our wedding, he knocked on my door. I was sitting at my dressing table in my nightgown and wrapper, brushing out my hair when I heard the soft rap of knuckles against wood. My heart leapt into my throat. I called for him to enter, expecting perhaps some urgent matter, some problem that required immediate attention. Instead, he simply stood in the doorway, still fully dressed, his cravat loosened and his hair slightly disheveled, as though he had been running his hands through it. "I wanted to apologize," he said without preamble, "for the way I spoke to you, for the coldness I have shown you these past months. You did not deserve it. You have been nothing but kind to Lottie, nothing but patient with my moods and my absence. I have been unfair to you." I set down my hairbrush and turned to face him fully. "You have been hurt," I said, "deeply hurt. I do not take it personally. Your Grace." "Edward," he said. "When we are alone, you may call me Edward." It was such a small thing, the offer of his given name, but it felt monumental. I nodded slowly. "Edward," I repeated, testing the shape of it on my tongue. "And you may call me Catherine, or simply Catherine." "Catherine," he said, and something in the way he spoke my name made my breath catch. "I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you. Our marriage was a business arrangement, and I do not presume to claim any rights that were not explicitly part of that arrangement. You are free to live your life as you choose, to come and go as you please. I ask only that you continue to care for Lottie, and that you maintain the appearance of propriety when we are in society. Beyond that, you owe me nothing." "And what of what you owe me?" I asked, before I could stop myself. "What of the companionship that should exist between husband and wife, even in a marriage of convenience? What of honesty and trust and the simple courtesy of being treated as more than a stranger in your home?" He flinched as though I had struck him. "You are right," he said after a moment. "You are absolutely right. I have treated you abominably. I can only say that I have been so consumed by my own pain that I failed to consider yours. Your father sold you to me to pay his debts. You had no more choice in this marriage than I did in my first. And I have repaid your sacrifice with neglect and coldness. For that I am truly sorry." I stood and moved toward him, stopping a few feet away, near enough to see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the shadow of beard on his jaw. He looked, in that moment, terribly vulnerable, and I felt my heart soften despite my resolve to remain detached. "Then, let us begin again," I said, "not as strangers bound by contract, but as partners trying to make the best of circumstances neither of us chose. Let us try to be friends, at least, for Lottie's sake, if not our own." He extended his hand to me, formal and old-fashioned, and I placed mine in his. His grip was warm and firm, and he held my hand for a moment longer than necessary before releasing it. "Friends?" he agreed. "Yes, I would like that very much." He left then, closing the door softly behind him, and I returned to my dressing table with hands that trembled slightly. It was not love, not romance, not anything resembling the passionate attachments I had once dreamed of as a girl reading novels in my father's library. But it was something, a beginning, a possibility, and in that moment it felt like more than I had dared hope for. The summer weeks passed more pleasantly after that. Edward remained at Greystone rather than returning to London, and we fell into a comfortable routine. We breakfasted together, reading newspapers and correspondence in companionable silence. We took walks through the gardens in the evening, discussing inconsequential matters, the weather and the estate and books we had read. We visited Lottie together, playing games and telling stories, and slowly, so slowly I barely noticed it happening, we began to feel like something resembling a family. Edward told me about the estate, about his responsibilities and his concerns for the tenants and the farms. I told him about my childhood, about my love of music and literature, about the small dreams I had harbored before my father's gambling debts had destroyed any hope of their realization. We did not speak of his first wife, did not delve into the painful territory of the past, but we learned each other's present selves, discovered unexpected commonalities, found that we could make each other laugh on occasion. I began to look forward to the sound of his footsteps in the hall, to the sight of him riding back from the moors with his coat billowing behind him, to the way his expression would soften when Lottie ran to him with outstretched arms. I began to notice things about him I had not allowed myself to see before. The way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size. The rare but devastating smile that appeared when something genuinely pleased him. The intelligence in his gray eyes. The unexpected kindness in his dealings with servants and tenants. The way he could be stern and just in one moment and surprisingly gentle in the next. I realized with something like alarm, beginning to care for him. Not love, surely. We had not known each other long enough for love, had not shared enough of ourselves. But something warmer than friendship. Something that made my heart beat faster when he entered a room. Something that made me lonely on the rare occasions when business called him away to the village or to visit neighboring estates. It was dangerous, this growing attachment. I reminded myself constantly that he had married me out of necessity, that his heart belonged still to a dead woman he believed had betrayed him, that he had been very clear about not expecting or offering anything beyond civility and mutual respect. I could not afford to hope for more, could not afford to imagine that the warmth I sometimes glimpsed in his gaze might mean anything beyond simple gratitude for my care of Lottie. But hope, I discovered, is not so easily controlled. It grows in the dark places of the heart, like flowers pushing through stone, stubborn and determined and impossible to uproot once it has taken hold. In late August, a letter arrived from London that changed everything. I was in the morning room working on my embroidery when Edward strode in, the letter crushed in his fist, his face pale with barely suppressed fury. He paced the length of the room twice before speaking, his movements sharp and agitated. "We have been invited to the Duchess of Wexford's autumn ball," he said, his voice tight. "It is the event of the season. Refusing would cause talk, would draw exactly the kind of attention we have been trying to avoid. We must attend." I set down my needlework carefully. I had known this moment would come eventually. We could not hide at Greystone forever, could not avoid society indefinitely. I was the Duchess of Greystone, and eventually I would have to face the world that had whispered about me, that had called me the charity bride, that would scrutinize my every movement and word, looking for proof that I was unworthy of the title I had bought with my father's shame. "When?" I asked calmly, though my stomach had begun to churn with anxiety. "The 15th of September, he said. "We will need to return to London within the week. You will need new gowns, proper jewels. I will not have you ridiculed for lacking the trappings appropriate to your position. I do not care what they think of my clothes, I said quietly. They have already decided what to think of me. A new dress will not change that. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. Perhaps not, he said, but you are my wife, and I will not allow anyone to suggest that I have failed to provide for you appropriately. You will be dressed and jeweled as befits a duchess, and you will hold your head high, and you will show them all that you are far more than they imagine. There was something fierce in his expression, something protective, and I felt a rush of gratitude mixed with apprehension. He was angry on my behalf, I realized. Angry at the society that had judged me, angry at himself perhaps for putting me in this position. It was the first time I had seen evidence that he cared at all what people said about me, that my dignity mattered to him beyond its reflection on his own reputation. Very well, I said. I will do my best not to embarrass you. You could never embarrass me, he said, and the certainty in his voice made my throat tighten. You have conducted yourself with more grace and dignity than any woman I have known. It is they who should be ashamed, not you. He left then, still agitated, still angry, and I sat alone in the morning room with my hands folded in my lap and my heart beating too fast. The ballroom, I thought. We were going back to the world that had whispered and judged and found me wanting. And I would have to stand beside Edward as his wife, as the mother figure to a child no one knew existed, and pretend that none of it wounded me. I did not know then what awaited us in London. Did not know that the autumn ball would become the scene of revelations that would shatter everything we thought we understood about the past. Did not know that a woman long dead would reach across the years to offer truths that would force Edward to confront the lies he had told himself, or that I would be the one to uncover the evidence that proved his late wife's innocence. All I knew was that I was afraid of the whispers and the stares and the cruelty of people who would judge me without knowing me. But more than that, I was afraid of what it would mean to stand beside Edward in public, to play the role of devoted wife when my heart had begun to wish that the role were real, to pretend indifference when I increasingly felt anything but. We left for London 5 days later, Lottie remaining at Greystone in Mrs. Harlowe's care. The journey was long and quiet, Edward lost in his own thoughts, staring out the carriage window at the passing countryside. I watched him covertly, noting the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. He was dreading this return to society as much as I was, perhaps more. For him, it meant facing the people who had whispered about his wife's infidelity, who knew the shame he had endured, who would watch him with his new bride and make their own assumptions and judgments. As the carriage rolled through the gates of Greystone House in Mayfair, as we stepped down into the bustle of the city with its noise and crowds and suffocating propriety, I felt the weight of what was to come settle over me like a cloak of lead. The ballroom awaited us, the moment of truth, and I could only hope that when it came, we would both find the courage to face whatever revelations emerged from the shadows of the past. London in autumn was a different world from the quiet moors of Yorkshire. The city pressed in on all sides, all noise and crowds and the constant awareness of being watched. Every time I stepped out of Greystone House, even just to walk in the garden square, I felt eyes upon me, the neighbors peering from behind curtains, the passers-by slowing their steps to get a better look at the Duke's new wife, the whispers that followed me like shadows, never quite loud enough to hear clearly, but impossible to ignore. The charity bride, the merchant's daughter, the one who bought her title with her father's debts. I heard the words in my imagination, even when no one spoke them aloud, felt their weight pressing down upon my shoulders until I wanted to flee back to the safety of Greystone Hall and never emerge again. But I had promised Edward I would face society with dignity, and I would not break that promise. So I held my head high and ordered new gowns from the modiste and allowed myself to be fitted with jewels from the Greystone collection, sapphires and diamonds that felt like chains around my throat. I practiced my curtsy and my small talk and the art of looking serene while my stomach churned with anxiety. And I tried not to think about the ball that loomed ever closer, the moment when I would have to walk into a room full of people who despised me and pretend I did not care. Edward was different in London, more distant, more formal. The easy companionship we had found at Greystone replaced by a careful politeness that felt like a wall between us. He spent long hours at his club or meeting with his man of affairs, and when he was home, he retreated to his study and did not emerge until dinner. We still took our meals together, but the conversation was stilted now, full of awkward pauses and topics carefully avoided. I told myself it did not matter, that I had no right to expect anything different. But I missed him, missed the man I had begun to know in Yorkshire, the one who smiled at Lottie's antics and walked with me in the evening gardens, and occasionally looked at me as though I were more than just a convenient solution to his problems. In London, he was the Duke of Greystone again, cold and untouchable, and I was simply the wife he had acquired out of necessity. 3 days before the ball, I discovered the letters. I had been looking for a book in the library, running my fingers along the spines on the upper shelves, when I dislodged a small wooden box that had been hidden behind a row of volumes. It tumbled to the floor with a clatter, and when I bent to retrieve it, the lid sprang open and a bundle of envelopes tied with ribbons spilled across the carpet. They were addressed to Edward in an elegant feminine hand. The return address was a solicitor's office in London, but the envelopes themselves were old, yellowed with age, and many of them appeared never to have been opened. I knew I should not look, knew that whatever these letters contained was not meant for my eyes. But something in the careful way they had been hidden, something in the dates on the postmarks, made me hesitate. The oldest letters were from 7 years ago. The most recent was dated just 3 months after Edward's first wife had died. And when I looked more closely at the handwriting, I saw with a shock of recognition that it matched the script on a portrait label I had seen at Greystone Hall. The portrait of the first Duchess. These were her letters. Letters she had written to Edward. Letters he had apparently hidden away without reading most of them. I should have returned them to their hiding place immediately, should have respected his privacy and his pain. But I thought of Lottie, hidden away because of the story Edward believed about his wife's betrayal. I thought of the anguish in his eyes when he spoke of the woman he had loved and lost. And I thought that perhaps, just perhaps, these letters contained truths that needed to be known. With trembling hands, I opened the first envelope. The paper inside was thin and covered with that same elegant script, and as I began to read, my heart started to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. "My dearest Edward," the letter began. "I write to you knowing you may never read these words, knowing that by the time you receive this, I may be beyond your reach. The doctors have told me the truth, though they tried to hide it behind careful phrases and false reassurances. The consumption that has plagued me these past months is not improving. I am dying, my love, and there are things you must know before I go. Things I should have told you long ago, but I was afraid, so terribly afraid of losing you, of seeing the love in your eyes turn to contempt." I read on, my breath coming faster, my hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. She wrote of her childhood, of a youthful indiscretion before she had ever met Edward, a love affair with a young man from her village that her family had discovered and violently ended. She wrote of being sent away in disgrace when she found herself with child, of giving birth in secret to a daughter she was forced to surrender to her sister to raise. She wrote of the heartbreak and shame that had shaped her, of the vow she made to never speak of it again. And then she wrote of meeting Edward, of falling truly and completely in love with him, of believing she had finally found happiness and redemption. She wrote of their wedding day, their early years together, the joy and peace she had found as his wife. She wrote of her terror when the consumption took hold, of her certainty that she would die before giving him the air he needed and deserved. "But there is something more, Edward, something you must understand." The letter continued. "My sister died this past year, and before her death, she sent my daughter to me. Charlotte. She is 9 years old now, though you have never met her, never knew she existed. I have kept her hidden at the London house, visiting her in secret, trying to find the courage to tell you the truth. But I am so afraid, my darling. Afraid you will hate me for the deception. Afraid you will turn away from this innocent child who bears the shame of my youthful mistake. I know what the gossips will say if the truth emerges after my death. I know they will claim she was born of an affair during our marriage, that I betrayed you, that she is proof of my infidelity. But I swear to you on everything I hold sacred that I have never been unfaithful to you, not in thought or deed. You have been my whole world, my salvation, my truest love. Charlotte is the daughter of my past, not a betrayal of our present. She deserves to know her mother before I am gone, deserves to be acknowledged and protected, deserves the love and care that only you can provide when I am no longer here. Please, Edward, please do not hate me for this. Please do not turn away from her. She is innocent of any wrongdoing, and she needs you. I have made arrangements with my solicitor to ensure these letters reach you, to ensure you know the truth. But more than anything, I pray you will find it in your heart to forgive me, to understand that everything I did out of fear and love in equal measure. The letter was signed simply Beatrice, and it was dated 2 weeks before her death. I sat there on the library floor with tears streaming down my face, the truth finally clear and terrible and heartbreaking. Charlotte was not the product of an affair during the marriage. She was Beatrice's daughter from before, a child she had tried to protect and acknowledge before her death. And Edward, in his grief and pain, had never opened these letters, had never learned the truth, had spent 3 years believing his wife had betrayed him when she had done nothing of the sort. I opened another envelope, and another, each one building on the story, each one revealing more of Beatrice's desperation and love. She wrote of trying to tell Edward in person, of losing her courage, of the illness that progressed faster than she had anticipated. She wrote of her love for him in words so beautiful and raw they made my chest ache. She wrote of her hope that he would forgive her, that he would care for Charlotte, that he would find happiness again after she was gone. The final letter was dated 3 days before her death. Her handwriting was shaky, barely legible, the words of a woman slipping away from the world. "Forgive me," she had written. "Love her. Remember that I loved you more than life itself. And please, my darling, allow yourself to love again. Do not let grief and anger poison your heart. You deserve happiness, Edward. You deserve a life filled with love and light. Do not waste it mourning a woman who is gone when there is so much still to live for." I gathered the letters carefully, retied the ribbon with hands that would not stop trembling. Edward needed to see these, needed to know the truth. The story he had told himself about his wife's betrayal, the reason he had hidden Charlotte away, the justification for his coldness and his refusal to love again, all of it was built on a foundation of misunderstanding and unopened letters. But how could I tell him? How could I reveal that I had discovered his private correspondence, that I had violated his trust even if my intentions had been good? And how would he react to learning that the woman he had believed betrayed him had actually loved him faithfully until her last breath? That the child he could barely stand to look at was innocent not just of her supposed father's sins, but of any sin at all? I stood slowly, clutching the box of letters to my chest, and made my way to Edward's study. He was there, seated at his desk with ledgers spread before him, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. He looked up when I entered, and whatever he saw in my face made him rise immediately, concern flooding his features. "Catherine," he said, moving toward me, "what has happened? You look as though you have seen a ghost." "In a way," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I have." I held out the box of letters, watched his expression change from concern to confusion to recognition, and finally to something that looked like fear. He stared at the box as though it were a serpent, made no move to take it from my hands. "Where did you find those?" he asked, his voice flat and careful. "In the library," I said, "hidden behind some books. I am sorry, Edward. I know I had no right to look, but I did, and I read them, and you need to read them too. You need to know the truth." "The truth," he repeated, and laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "I know the truth, Catherine. I lived it. I do not need to read my dead wife's lies to understand what she did to me." "They are not lies," I said urgently, stepping closer to him. "Edward, please. She loved you. She was faithful to you. Charlotte is her daughter from before your marriage, not during it. Beatrice was trying to tell you, was trying to explain, but she ran out of time. She died before she could make you understand." He snatched the box from my hands then, his movements sharp with anger. "You had no right," he said. "No right to invade my privacy, to dig up the past, to presume you understand anything about my first marriage or my wife or what I have endured. These are not your secrets to uncover." "But they affect Lottie," I said, refusing to back down even as my heart raced with fear and adrenaline. "They affect that innocent child you have hidden away because you believe she represents a betrayal that never happened. Do you not see? Beatrice was protecting her, trying to give her a home and a father and a future. And you have punished her for sins she never committed because you never opened these letters, never gave Beatrice the chance to explain." "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get out of my study, Catherine. Now." I stood my ground for one more moment, searching his face for any sign that my words had reached him, that he would read the letters and learn the truth. But all I saw was rage and pain and a fear so deep it made my own heart ache. He was afraid, I realized. Afraid that if he read those letters, if he learned that his wife had truly loved him, that he had wasted 3 years nursing anger at a woman who had done nothing wrong, the grief would destroy him. I left the study quietly, closing the door behind me, and made my way to my chambers on legs that felt like water. I did not know if he would read the letters, did not know if the truth would reach him, or if he would burn them unread and continue living in the prison of his own making. All I knew was that I had done what I could, had given him the chance to know the truth, and the rest was beyond my control. That night, I heard him pacing in his study, heard the sound of glass breaking, heard a sound that might have been a sob or a curse, or simply a man breaking under the weight of too much pain carried for too long. I lay in my bed with tears on my cheeks and prayed that he would find the strength to face what he had lost, to forgive himself for the mistakes he had made in grief, to open his heart to the possibility that love and redemption might still be possible. The next morning, when I came down to breakfast, the box of letters sat open on the table, every envelope torn, every page read. Edward was not there. The servant said he had left before dawn, had ridden out without saying where he was going or when he would return. And I was left alone in the house, with the truth finally revealed and no way of knowing what it would mean for any of us. The ball was tomorrow night, the moment when we would face society together, when all of London would watch and judge and whisper. And I did not know if the man who would stand beside me would be the one I had begun to care for at Greystone Hall, or the broken, angry stranger who had returned in London, or something else entirely, transformed by truths that had come too late, but perhaps, just perhaps, not too late to matter. Edward did not return until late afternoon on the day of the ball. I had spent the hours pacing my rooms, too anxious to eat or read or do anything productive. The servants moved through the house with careful quiet, sensing the tension that hung over everything, like a storm waiting to break. My new gown hung in the wardrobe, emerald silk that matched the Greystone emeralds I would wear, and every time I looked at it, I felt my stomach clench with dread. I heard the front door open, heard his heavy footsteps in the entry hall, heard him speaking quietly with the butler. Then silence. I waited, hardly breathing, wondering if he would come to me, if he would speak to me at all, before we were forced to present ourselves as a united front before society. Minutes passed, an hour, nothing. Finally, I could bear it no longer. I made my way downstairs to his study and knocked softly on the door. No answer. I knocked again, more firmly, and heard him say something that might have been "come in" or might have been "go away." I opened the door. He was standing by the window, still in his riding clothes, staring out at the street below. He did not turn when I entered, did not acknowledge my presence at all, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his spine, and I knew he was aware of me. "Edward," I said quietly, "we need to speak before tonight. We cannot go to the ball like this, with this wall between us." "There is nothing to say," he replied, his voice flat and exhausted. "You were right. She was faithful. She loved me. And I have spent 3 years hating her memory and punishing an innocent child for crimes that were never committed. I have been a fool and a coward, and now it is too late to make amends." "It is not too late," I said, moving closer to him. "Beatrice wanted you to be happy, Edward. She wanted you to love Lottie, to give her the life she deserved. You can still do that. You can still honor her memory by being the father that child needs." He turned then, and the devastation in his face made my breath catch. "I destroyed 3 years," he said. 3 years that Lottie spent hidden away, believing she was shameful, believing she was the product of sin. 3 years that I spent nursing anger at a woman who died loving me, who died begging me to forgive her for things she did not need forgiveness for. How do I come back from that, Catherine? How do I look at that child and explain that I rejected her not because of anything she did, but because I was too much of a coward to open a box of letters? "You tell her the truth," I said firmly. "You tell her that you made a mistake, that you were hurt and grieving and you did not understand. And then you spend the rest of your life making it right. Children are remarkably forgiving, Edward. They do not need perfection. They need love and presence and the knowledge that they matter." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, some of the rigid control giving way to something rawer and more vulnerable. "You have been so much more than I had any right to expect," he said quietly. "You came into this marriage asking for nothing, and you have given everything. You have loved Lottie when I could not. You have been patient with my coldness and my anger. You have uncovered truths I was too afraid to face. I do not deserve your kindness, Catherine." "This is not about deserving," I said, and my voice trembled slightly. "This is about choosing to move forward, about choosing to build something good from the wreckage of the past. You are not the man you were 3 years ago, Edward. You have the chance to be better, to do better. Please do not waste it by drowning in guilt." He reached out then, hesitantly, and took my hand in his. His grip was warm and strong, and I felt the calluses on his palm from his riding, felt the slight tremor that suggested he was not as controlled as he appeared. "I have another confession to make," he said, his eyes searching my face. "These past months at Greystone, watching you with Lottie, talking with you in the evenings, learning who you are beneath the circumstances that brought you to me, I have come to care for you, Catherine. More than I intended, more than I believed myself still capable of. I told myself it was gratitude, respect, simple affection. But I think it is more than that. I think I am falling in love with my wife, and I do not know what to do with that knowledge." My heart was beating so hard I was certain he could hear it. I stared at him, speechless, unable to process what he had just said. He loved me, or was beginning to. The cold, distant Duke who had married me out of necessity, who had barely looked at me for months, who had kept his heart locked away behind walls of grief and anger, was telling me that those walls were crumbling, that I had somehow found my way inside. "I do not expect you to return the feeling," he continued quickly, misinterpreting my silence. "I know this marriage was not what you wanted, that you had no choice in it, that you have every right to keep your heart to yourself. I only tell you this because tonight, when we walk into that ballroom together, I want you to know that you will not be alone, that I will stand beside you not out of obligation, but because I choose to, because you matter to me, Catherine, because somewhere along the way you have become important to me in ways I never anticipated. I found my voice finally, though it came out as barely a whisper. I care for you too, I said. I have tried not to. I told myself it was foolish to hope for anything more than civility and mutual respect. But watching you with Lottie, seeing the man you are when you let your guard down, learning your kindness and your strength and your capacity for love despite all the pain you have endured, I could not help but hope. Could not help but begin to imagine that perhaps this marriage might become something real. He pulled me closer then, his free hand coming up to cup my face with such gentleness that tears sprang to my eyes. I am so sorry, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Sorry for the coldness, for the neglect, for treating you as less than you deserve. You are remarkable, Catherine. You are brave and kind and stronger than I could ever be. And I promise you, from this moment forward, I will try to be worthy of you. I will try to be the husband you should have had from the beginning. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand against my cheek, the solid presence of him so close. We stood there for a long moment, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows, the sounds of the city muted and distant. It felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us, to this small bubble of peace and possibility before we had to face the chaos waiting beyond these walls. Tonight will be difficult, he said finally, pulling back slightly to look into my eyes. They will stare and whisper and judge. Lady Pemberton will make cutting remarks. Lord Ashcroft will look down his nose at both of us. There will be those who remember Beatrice, who will compare you to her and find you lacking simply because you are different. And there will be those who know the rumors about Lottie, who will probe and pry and try to uncover the secrets we have kept hidden. Let them, I said with more confidence than I felt. Let them whisper and judge. We know the truth. We know that Lottie is innocent, that Beatrice was faithful, that our marriage is real and good and built on more than just convenience. Their opinions cannot change those facts. You are braver than I am, he said, and smiled slightly. But you are right. We will face them together, and we will hold our heads high, and we will show them that the Duchess of Greystone is everything they are not, gracious and dignified and worth 10 of them. He kissed my forehead then, a gentle, chaste kiss that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through my entire body. Now, he said, pulling back with obvious reluctance, we should both prepare. The ball begins at 9, and we cannot be late. First impressions matter, and I intend to make certain that everyone in that ballroom understands that I am proud to call you my wife. He released my hand and moved toward the door, pausing on the threshold to look back at me. Catherine, he said, thank you for everything. For seeing past my anger to the man beneath, for giving me a reason to hope again, for being exactly who you are. He left then, and I stood alone in his study with my hand pressed to my chest where my heart was still racing. He loved me, or was beginning to. And I loved him, I realized with sudden clarity. Loved him despite the difficult beginning, despite the pain and the secrets and the complicated tangle of our circumstances. Loved him for his strength and his vulnerability, for the way he had learned to love Lottie, for the courage it had taken him to read those letters and face the truth. But there was still tonight to get through. Still the ballroom and the whispers and the judgment. Still the world that would look at us and see only the charity bride and the widowed duke and make their assumptions accordingly. I could only hope that we would find the strength to face it together, and that whatever happened in that glittering, merciless space, we would emerge on the other side still standing. I returned to my chambers and allowed my maid to help me dress. The emerald gown fit perfectly, the silk whispering against my skin as I moved. The Greystone emeralds were heavy around my throat and wrists, ostentatious displays of wealth that felt foreign against my skin, but sent a clear message about my status and position. My hair was arranged in an elaborate style, pinned with more emeralds, and when I finally looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I looked like a duchess, elegant and refined and expensive. But inside, I was still Catherine, the merchant's daughter who had been sold to pay her father's debts, the girl who had never expected to find love or purpose or a place where she belonged. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and told myself that I could do this, that I was stronger than my fear, braver than my doubts. Edward was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. He had changed into formal evening attire, all black and white severity that made him look even more imposing than usual. But when he looked up and saw me descending toward him, his expression transformed. His eyes widened, his lips parted slightly, and I saw something that looked like awe cross his face. "You are beautiful," he said when I reached him, and the simple honesty in his voice made me blush. "Absolutely beautiful. They will not be able to look away from you." He offered me his arm, and I took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fine fabric of his coat. The carriage was waiting, and we rode through the gaslit streets of London in silence, both of us preparing ourselves for what was to come. I watched the city pass by the window, the familiar streets and buildings, the other carriages all heading in the same direction, all carrying people dressed in their finest, all going to see and be seen. The Duchess of Wexford's townhouse blazed with light, every window illuminated, music and laughter spilling out into the night. Carriages lined the street, liveried footmen everywhere, the cream of London society ascending the steps in glittering waves. My stomach knotted with anxiety as our carriage pulled up, as the door opened and Edward stepped out first, turning back to help me down. "Ready?" he asked quietly, and I saw my own apprehension reflected in his eyes. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be anyway." He smiled at that, a real genuine smile, and squeezed my hand. "That is all anyone can ask," he said. "Come, let us show them what we are made of." We climbed the steps together, passed through the receiving line where the Duchess of Wexford greeted us with a smile that did not reach her eyes, moved into the ballroom where hundreds of faces turned toward us, and the whispers began immediately. I felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure against my skin, felt Edward's arm tense beneath my hand, heard the rustle of fans and the low murmur of voices as society took in the sight of the Duke of Greystone and his new bride making their first public appearance together. And then, Edward did something I had not expected. He turned to me, right there in front of everyone, and raised my hand to his lips, kissing it with obvious affection and lingering just a moment longer than propriety dictated. The gesture was deliberate, unmistakable, a public declaration that I was important to him, that our marriage was more than just convenience. The whispers increased, shock and speculation and surprise rippling through the crowd. Edward ignored them all, his attention focused entirely on me, his eyes warm and reassuring. "We will dance first," he said quietly, "and then we will face whatever comes next together." He led me onto the floor just as the orchestra began a waltz, and suddenly we were moving, spinning through the crowd with his hand at my waist and my hand in his, and for just a moment I forgot about the watching eyes and the whispers and the judgment. There was only Edward, looking at me as though I were the only person in the room, holding me as though I were precious, and the music carrying us through a moment of unexpected grace before the storm I knew was coming broke over our heads. The waltz ended too soon. As the final notes faded and Edward released me from his embrace, the reality of where we were and what we faced came rushing back. All around us, couples were forming for the next dance. But the space immediately surrounding us remained curiously empty, as though society had drawn an invisible circle around the Duke and his charity bride, keeping us separate and apart. I saw Lady Pemberton first, resplendent in purple silk with diamonds dripping from her throat and ears. Her expression, one of barely concealed disdain, as she whispered behind her fan to the women clustered around her. Lord Ashcroft stood near the refreshment table with his cronies, his aristocratic features arranged in that particular sneer, the high-born reserve for those they consider beneath them. Younger women, debutantes, and recently married ladies stared at me with open curiosity, taking in every detail of my gown and jewels and demeanor, cataloguing my faults to share later in their drawing rooms. Edward kept his hand at the small of my back, a gesture of support and possession both. His jaw was tight, his expression carefully neutral, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. He had faced this before, I realized. After Beatrice's death, after the whispers about her supposed infidelity had begun, he had endured the stares and speculation and judgment. And now he was doing it again, this time for my sake. "Your Grace," a voice called out, sharp and carrying. The crowd parted slightly, and Lady Pemberton herself approached, her chin lifted imperiously, her eyes glittering with malice. "What a surprise to see you here. We had quite given up hope that you would deign to join society again. And with your new bride, how delightful. Tell me, my dear," the words directed at me now, "are you finding married life to your satisfaction? It must be quite an adjustment from your previous circumstances." The insult was subtle but unmistakable. The emphasis on previous circumstances, a clear reference to my father's trade and debts. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, felt the old shame trying to claw its way up my throat. But Edward's hand pressed more firmly against my back, steadying me, reminding me that I was not alone. "My wife has adapted remarkably well," Edward said before I could respond. His tone pleasant, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "She has proven herself to be everything a duchess should be. Gracious, intelligent, compassionate. Qualities that are, I fear, increasingly rare in modern society." Lady Pemberton's smile tightened. "How fortunate for you both," she said, "though one cannot help but wonder at the haste of the marriage. Barely 6 months of courtship, was it not? Quite scandalous, really. Unless, of course, there were pressing reasons for such speed." The implication was clear. She was suggesting impropriety, that I had somehow trapped Edward into marriage through compromising circumstances. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Edward spoke first, his voice cutting through the suddenly hushed crowd like a blade. "The only pressing reason was my desire to make Catherine my wife," he said coldly. "I had waited long enough, mourned long enough, denied myself happiness long enough. When I met her, I knew immediately that she was the woman I wanted beside me for the rest of my life. I saw no reason to delay what was inevitable." "Inevitable," Lady Pemberton repeated, her eyebrows rising. "How romantic. Though I suppose practicality plays a role as well. After all, a man in your position needs a wife to manage his household, to provide heirs, to maintain appearances. Love is such a quaint notion in these modern times, do you not think?" "I do not find it quaint at all," Edward said, and something in his tone made the entire ballroom fall silent. "I found it essential. You speak of practicality and appearances, Lady Pemberton, but you know nothing of what truly matters. My first wife taught me that, though I was too blind to understand it while she lived." He paused, and I felt my heart begin to race. What was he doing? Why was he bringing up Beatrice here, now, in front of all these people who had whispered about her, who had judged her? "My late wife," he continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, "was a woman of extraordinary grace and courage. She faced illness and death with dignity, and she loved me faithfully until her last breath. Yet I allowed the whispers of society, the insinuations and speculation, to poison my memory of her. I allowed grief and pride to blind me to the truth she had tried to tell me, and for 3 years I have lived with the consequences of that blindness." "Edward," I whispered, touching his arm, "you do not have to do this." He looked down at me, and the love in his eyes was so clear, so obvious, that I heard someone gasp. "Yes, I do," he said quietly. "For you, for Lottie, for Beatrice. The truth needs to be spoken." He turned back to the crowd, to the sea of faces watching us with varying degrees of shock and fascination. Before she died, my wife left me letters, he said. Letters I did not read for 3 years because I was too angry, too hurt, too certain I already knew what they would contain. But my current wife, my Catherine, had the courage I lacked. She found those letters. She read them, and she made me face what I had been running from. The truth. He took a breath, and I saw his hands tremble slightly before he clasped them behind his back. Beatrice was faithful to me, he said clearly. The child some of you have whispered about, the daughter I have kept hidden, she is not the product of an affair during our marriage. She is Beatrice's daughter from before we met. A child she bore in her youth and was forced to give up. A child she tried to reclaim at the end of her life, tried to give a home and a future. And I, in my grief and pride, refused to listen, refused to understand, refused to see the innocent child for what she was, my wife's daughter, and my responsibility. The silence was absolute now. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Everyone frozen in place, staring at the Duke of Greystone as he systematically dismantled the rumors and speculation that had defined the past 3 years. I have wronged many people, Edward continued, his voice rough with emotion. I wronged my wife by doubting her, by allowing society's poison to infect my heart. I wronged Charlotte by hiding her away, by making her feel ashamed of her very existence. And I wronged my current wife by bringing her into this mess, by marrying her out of necessity and then treating her with coldness and neglect when she deserved nothing but honor and respect. He turned to me again, and suddenly the entire ballroom disappeared. There was only Edward, looking at me with such raw honesty that I felt tears prick my eyes. But Catherine, he said, his voice dropping so that only those nearest could hear, though the silence was such that his words still carried, you have given me something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. The possibility of happiness. The courage to face my mistakes and try to do better. You have loved a child who is not yours, protected her, cherished her, given her the mother she desperately needed. You have been patient with my darkness, understanding of my pain, and brave enough to push me toward the light even when I resisted. He took my hands in his, right there in front of everyone, and I saw tears shining in his own eyes. I married you out of necessity, he said, but I love you by choice. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the good in people even when they do not deserve it. I love how you make Lottie laugh, how you stand up to me when I am being stubborn, how you walk through the world with dignity even when others try to diminish you. And I am asking you now, in front of all these people who have judged us both, to give me the chance to be the husband you should have had from the beginning, to build a real marriage with me, one based on love and trust and partnership, to let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made me better simply by being yourself. I could not speak, could not breathe. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I did not care that everyone was watching, that this private moment was happening in the most public way possible. All I cared about was Edward, standing before me with his heart laid bare, asking me to love him openly after months of careful distance and guarded hope. Yes, I finally managed to whisper. Yes, Edward. Always yes. He pulled me into his arms then, right there in the Duchess of Wexford's ballroom, and kissed me. It was not a chaste social kiss, not a brief peck appropriate for public consumption. It was a real kiss, deep and passionate and claiming, a kiss that announced to everyone watching that we were not just husband and wife in name, but truly, completely in love. When we finally broke apart, the ballroom erupted, not in whispers this time, but in applause. Some of it was genuine, I think, moved by the honesty of Edward's declaration. Some was simply relief that the drama had resolved itself in such a satisfactory manner. But Lady Pemberton stood frozen, her face pale with shock and perhaps a touch of shame, and Lord Ashcroft had turned away, clearly uncomfortable with the display of genuine emotion. The Duchess of Wexford herself approached then, a small smile playing about her lips. "Well, Your Grace," she said to Edward, "that was quite the speech." I do believe you have set a new standard for romantic declarations. The poets will be writing about this for years. Edward inclined his head, one arm still wrapped firmly around my waist. I felt it was time the truth was known, he said. My wife deserves better than whispers and speculation. Indeed, the Duchess said, turning to me. You are a fortunate woman, my dear, and I think we have all been too quick to judge what we did not understand. I hope you will both accept my apology for any unkindness you have endured under my roof this evening. There is nothing to forgive, I said quietly, finding my voice at last. You only knew what you were told. Now you know the truth, and that is all that matters. She smiled at that, a real smile this time, and squeezed my hand briefly before moving away to greet other guests. Others approached then, some offering congratulations, some simply curious, some clearly disappointed that the scandal had resolved itself so neatly. Edward fielded them all with grace, never releasing me, making it clear through his every word and gesture that I was his choice, his love, his partner in truth. We stayed at the ball for another hour, dancing twice more and circulating through the crowd. The whispers did not stop entirely, of course. Society loves its gossip too much for that. But the tone had changed. Instead of contempt and judgment, there was a grudging respect, perhaps even a touch of envy. The Duke of Greystone, it seemed, had done the impossible. He had chosen love over propriety, truth over appearances, and somehow emerged stronger for it. When we finally left, stepping out into the cool night air and climbing into our carriage, I felt as though I could breathe properly for the first time in hours. Edward sat beside me, his hand finding mine in the darkness, his thumb tracing small circles on my palm. That was terrifying, I said, and felt him laugh softly beside me. Yes, he agreed, but necessary, and worth it, I think, to see Lady Pemberton's face when I kissed you. I laughed then too, the tension of the evening finally breaking, and leaned against his shoulder. What happens now? I asked. What do we tell Lottie? We tell her the truth, he said firmly. We tell her that her mother loved her, that she is not shameful or wrong, that she is my daughter in every way that matters. And we tell her that she has a new mother who loves her just as much, who will never let anyone make her feel less than she is. He paused, then added more quietly, and then we go home to Greystone, all of us together, and we start building the life we should have had from the beginning. A real family, Catherine. That is what I want. What do you want? I turned to look at him, seeing his face in the dim light from the passing street lamps, seeing the hope and love and slight uncertainty in his expression. I want exactly that, I said. I want to watch Lottie grow up knowing she is loved and valued. I want to walk through the gardens with you in the evening and argue about which books are worth reading. I want to fill that big, cold house with warmth and laughter and children of our own someday. I want a life with you, Edward. A real life, not just an arrangement. He kissed me again then, slower this time, sweeter. A kiss that tasted of promises and new beginnings. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his hand cupping my face with such tenderness that my heart ached. I do not deserve you, he whispered, but I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. You already are, I told him. You were brave enough to face the truth, brave enough to change, brave enough to love again, despite the pain it cost you the first time. That is all I could ever ask for. We rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, wrapped in each other's arms, planning the future that had seemed impossible just hours before. And when we arrived at Greystone House, Edward did not go to his chambers and I to mine. Instead, we climbed the stairs together, and for the first time since our wedding night, we shared a bed as husband and wife in truth, sealing the vows we had spoken months before with love and passion and the quiet certainty that we had found something rare and precious in the wreckage of our separate pains. The next morning, we left London and returned to Greystone Hall. Lottie met us at the door, bursting with questions about the ball and the beautiful gowns, and whether there had been dancing. Edward scooped her up in his arms, and I saw her eyes go wide with surprise and delight at the unexpected affection. "Lottie," he said, carrying her into the drawing room and settling on the sofa with her in his lap, "there is something important I need to tell you. Something about your mother, and about why you have been staying in the nursery instead of with the rest of the family." I sat beside them, my hand resting on Edward's shoulder, and together we told her the truth. Not all of it, not the details that were too adult and complicated for a child of 5 to understand, but the essential truth. That her mother had loved her deeply, that she was not shameful or wrong, that the reason she had been kept separate had nothing to do with her and everything to do with grown-up mistakes and misunderstandings. "So I can come downstairs now?" she asked, her gray eyes bright with hope. "I can eat breakfast with you and Papa and play in the gardens and not have to hide anymore?" "Yes," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, darling, you can do all of those things. You are my daughter, Lottie. Not by blood, perhaps, but by choice and by love. And Catherine is your mother now, if you will have her. We are a family, the 3 of us, and families do not hide from each other." Lottie threw her arms around his neck and then reached for me, pulling me into the embrace. And we sat there together in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows of Greystone Hall, holding each other and beginning the slow work of healing the wounds the past had left behind. The months that followed were not without challenges. Society did not forget overnight, and there were still those who whispered and judged. But Edward and I faced them together, secure in the knowledge of our love and the rightness of our choices. Lottie blossomed under the attention and affection, growing from a quiet, cautious child into a bright, confident little girl who filled the house with laughter and mischief. We returned to London for the season the following spring, and this time when we walked into ballrooms and drawing rooms, we did so with our heads held high and Lottie between us, no longer hidden but openly acknowledged as our daughter. Some people were scandalized, of course, but many more were moved by Edward's honesty and the obvious love between us, and slowly, gradually, society's opinion began to shift. Lady Pemberton never apologized, but she stopped making cutting remarks. Lord Ashcroft found other targets for his disdain, and the Duchess of Wexford became an unexpected ally, inviting us to dinners and making it clear that those who wished to maintain her favor would treat the Duke and Duchess of Greystone with respect. 2 years after that first terrible ball, I gave birth to a son, a healthy boy with Edward's gray eyes and my dark hair. We named him James, after Edward's father, and Lottie was beside herself with joy at having a baby brother. Edward wept when he held his son for the first time, overcome with emotions he had never expected to feel again, and I understood that this was yet another gift we had given each other. Not just love, but the possibility of family, of future, of hope renewed. I think of Beatrice sometimes, when I sit in the gardens at Greystone watching Lottie play with her brother, when I lie in Edward's arms at night and feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, when I walk through the halls of the house that has become truly mine. I think of the woman who loved Edward first, who died too young, who left behind letters that changed everything. And I am grateful to her, grateful that she loved him enough to fight for the truth, grateful that she gave him Lottie, grateful that her legacy was not one of betrayal, but of courage and hope. I was called the charity bride once, the woman bought with desperation and sold with shame. But I became something far more precious. I became the Duchess of Greystone in truth, beloved and valued and cherished. I became the mother of children I love with my whole heart. And I became the wife of a man who taught me that love can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, that wounds can heal given time and honesty, and that sometimes the bargains we make out of necessity become the greatest blessings of our lives. That night in the ballroom, when Edward spoke his truth before all of London, When he kissed me in front of everyone and declared his love without shame or hesitation, the world did not fall silent in judgment. It fell silent in awe, in recognition of something real and true and worth fighting for. And in that silence, in that moment of collective breath held, we were given the greatest gift of all: the freedom to love openly, to build our life together without apology, to prove that even marriages born of convenience can transform into something beautiful and lasting and true. I was mocked for being the Duke's bargain bride. But his last words that night, the words that made the ballroom fall silent, were not words of obligation or duty or regret. They were words of love, freely given and freely received. And in speaking them, he gave me everything I had never dared to hope for: a home, a family, a place where I belonged, and a love that would sustain us through all the years to come.